Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm delighted to speak in this debate, but it feels, Madam Deputy Speaker, it feels as though increasingly when I get on my feet in this place, it's because the government appears to be completely abrogating its responsibilities towards our older people. Whether that is removing pension credits from mixed-age couples, whether it's failing to keep their side of the bargain and pay the pensions due to women born in the 1950s who received little or no notice about the rise in the state pension age, it seems that this is happening more and more. And I wonder if the Minister is comfortable with this undeniable narrative that is emerging. Today, of course, we're talking about the UK Government's decision, and it is their decision, to have a go at the over-75s. Now, I've already raised this matter several times in the Chamber, and I've written to the Secretary of State, as have others. But I've never really had a proper or meaningful response. So today, I had been hoping for that, but sadly, we've just heard a wee bit more of the same. And it is important to be clear that the Government has maintained, and we've heard it again today, that it is not scrapping TV licences for the over-75s. It is simply delegating responsibility for these licences to the BBC. This, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a game of semantics, and it tells us that the Government wants to scrap these free TV licences but doesn't want to take responsibility for doing so. And it simply will not wash. I will indeed.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Would you agree with me that during the general election campaign in 2017, a member of the audience in the hustings said to me that he felt he was often being punished by the government for growing old, partly as a result of the measures that you that the honourable lady just repeated. Would the honourable lady agree with me that this was an opportunity for this government to do something to prove to pensioners and people over 75 that they do actually take into account the difficulties that they face, the loneliness that not having television could provoke, rather than reinforce that feeling of being punished?
I absolutely agree with the honourable lady. The Government has picked a fight with over-75s for no particular reason and for no particular benefit that I can see. But not taking responsibility for this simply won't wash. Since when, and I ask the Minister, since when has the BBC become an offshoot of the Department of Work and Pensions? The BBC is a broadcaster. It should not be charged, and it must not be charged, with deciding how much support our pensioners should receive from wider society. The UK Government has undoubtedly abrogated its responsibility on TV licence and has left the BBC to decide on whether or not it will impose this charge on the over-75s. The BBC will have £745 million less to spend annually on programmes, the combined budget of BBC Two, BBC Four and Radio 3, if it continues with the free TV licences. Options being considered range from the BBC taking on the funding, partially seeking partial payment, or removing the concession entirely, putting the BBC in an impossible position. I will indeed.
Thank you, Honourable Lady, for your debate. You're making a very good speech. The fact is that that benefit given to elderly pensioners is a benefit. And I have to say I speak someone with an interest, because I think I'm the only person over 75 here who actually receives a free television licence. But a benefit should be paid for out of progressive taxation, so that the rich pay most and the poor pay least. Given that we all pay for our licences, those under 75s, some of those people are very poor indeed, having to effectively pay some contribution towards towards broadcasting, which should rightly be paid for by the state.
I agree with the honourable gentleman. When we move away from progressive taxation, we move into a system that is extremely unfair and not the kind of society that most of us want to live in. The former BBC Director General Greg Dyke said that leaving the BBC to pick up the tab would impact on programme quality, and he said, and I quote, "Let's not kid ourselves, this won't have an impact on what the BBC will supply." It will. But apart from the impossible choice that has been foisted on the BBC, as the UK Government seeks cover on this, this policy means the Tories are rolling back, as we have heard, on their manifesto pledge to maintain pensioner benefits, including free TV licences. So how can anyone trust what they say in any future manifesto pledge? Let us remember that the reason all households with someone aged over 75 have been entitled to receive free TV licences funded by the UK Government is to help tackle pensioner poverty and isolation. For the Tories to decide to cease funding completely from next year, the consequences for my constituents in North Ayrshire and Arran, of whom more than 9,000 will be affected, will be far-reaching if these free licences are scrapped. And let's not forget either that combating loneliness is very important in terms of health outcomes for older people. But to try to contract out responsibility for this to the BBC is cowardly, and it is fooling no one, and it sets a dangerous precedent. Yeah. According to the BBC's own figures, scrapping the over-75s concessionary licence will take an average of more than £22,000 a week out of the pockets of over-75s in every single constituency. And we know that many thousands of pensioners already struggle to make ends meet. Age Scotland's Money Matters project found that 4 in 10 people over the age of 50 report feeling financially squeezed, and its survey on the housing needs of older people found that 6 in 10 pensioners who live alone report difficulties in paying their fuel bills. We know that over 70% of over-75s have a long-standing illness, and 29% live below or just above the poverty line. Make no mistake, this government is effectively asking our older people to choose between switching on the heating or turning on the TV. Yep. Having another bill to pay will push many more below the poverty line or deeper into poverty. As of the 1st of April, the colour TV licence increased to £154.50. Age UK has warned that scrapping the concession would push 50,000 over-75s into relative poverty, and that should cause the government to hang its head in shame. The financial strain can also be further exacerbated by any disability or long-term health conditions that an older person may be living with. The proportion of adults with a long-term limiting health condition is increasing as the population ages. More than 4/5 of people aged 85 or over have reported that their daily lives are limited by a long-term health problem or disability. This is important as there are numerous extra costs associated with having a disability or long-term health condition, such as having to get taxis more often to get out and about, and extra heating costs. Many rely on their television for companionship and entertainment. For the considerable number who don't have the internet, TV helps them to stay up to date with what's happening in the world. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government has told this chamber repeatedly that it cannot pay women born in the 1950s their pensions because we are all living longer. Well, given that the government recognises that we're all living longer, it cannot shirk its responsibilities and abandon those who are actually living longest. The government cannot have this both ways. The goalposts cannot be shifted depending on which particular group of society you wish to shaft at any particular time. It's simply not good enough. Hear, hear. For many older people, their television isn't just the box in the corner, it's company. Television is a lifeline, particularly for those most vulnerable and older. If mobility issues mean you struggle to get out and about, then the TV helps you stay connected. When money is a constant worry and is stressful, it's an escape. When you spend your days alone, it gives you something to look forward to, with people often identifying closely with TV characters and personalities. Figures show that over-75s watch an average of 33 hours of television each week, compared to 8 hours a week for those in their 20s. Imagine the loss of that lifeline for so many of our poorer pensioners who simply will not be able to afford the cost of a TV licence. And let's not forget, Madam Deputy Speaker, which has not been mentioned yet, every year people are fined for non-payment of their TV licence. To potentially prosecute people in their 80s and 90s is completely unacceptable and could well happen if these free TV licences are abolished. Is this an example, I ask the Minister, is this an example of addressing the burning injustices that the Prime Minister once spoke about? I believe it is vital to support our pensioners. Not only is the UK state pension the lowest in the developed world relative to wages, it has been further damaged by the Tory government's plans to reduce eligibility for pension credit, leaving some couples out of pocket by £7,320 every year. Throw in their contempt for women born in the 1950s regarding increases in the pension age, and it's clear that the government has no intention of honouring the contribution our elderly population has made over years. The BBC is a broadcaster. Public welfare is not its remit, and it should not be expected to decide whether older people have free TV licences or not. I will indeed.
I thank the honourable member for giving way and for the very, very strong speech that she is making. But as indicated earlier, a lot of older people who have contacted me are deeply frustrated because this decision is seen by them to have no democratic accountability. They want members in this House to be making a decision and to be inputting into that decision. Because of this agreement being done with the BBC some years ago, what has happened is that this has been delegated, it's been put out of this place, and that's deeply frustrating. Does she agree with me that this must change and this House must take action about that?
The Honourable Lady, we have a worrying trend of Parliament being bypassed. Now, I know that minority government isn't a comfortable place to be, but if you can't come to this chamber, if a party of government can't come to the chamber and sell their policies, then maybe the policies are the problem and not the Parliament itself. The BBC should not be making this decision, and this must not and should not become the responsibility of a UK government broadcaster. Lord Bragg has said the BBC is not an organisation that should collect taxes, of which the licence fee is one for social purposes. Its money should be used for making programmes. Clearly, the UK government disagrees. I urge the Tories, I urge this government to honour this extremely important manifesto commitment, to do the right thing and maintain pensioner benefits, including the TV licence, so that elderly people can continue to watch television for free instead of having to choose between watching television or switching on their heating, and or potentially being criminalised in their twilight years for watching Coronation Street. To those today, and I've heard them say today, that there are many pensioners who could pay for their own TV licence, what I say to that is not an argument to impose a charge for free TV licences. That is an argument against universalism, which takes us down an extremely dangerous road. It's a distracting diversion, and it's been used as a tactic to remove essential support. And in any case, it doesn't matter if you think that universalism as a principle is wrong. The fact is, this was in the Tory manifesto, and this backpedalling and attempt to deflect responsibility onto the BBC is fooling no one. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll end by saying this policy is perhaps the most mean-spirited policy of this government so far, and that is saying something. The government needs to get a grip, stop attacking our older people, pay them the care and respect they are due, and stop making life more difficult for them. And as we've heard before in this debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is extremely important that this House is allowed to have its say on this policy, because every single MP in this place should have the courage to go back to their constituents and look their older constituents in the eye and explain why they voted, if they voted, to remove free TV licences from them.
Hear, hear.